Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Melissa Schwartz, and I am so glad that you're here. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Tracy Cooper. Dr. Cooper is a leading thinker on the topic of high sensitivity, sensation seeking, and creativity, all while advocating for sensitive men and women to come into a true awareness and ownership of their trait. Tracy, thank you for being here with us. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm so delighted to be here and to share.
So we've already started talking about sensation seeking, and I know that this is kind of a buzzword these days, and it's something that not everybody is familiar with. So can we just sort of start by having you explain what you mean with that term?
Yeah, and that's a great start, Melissa. So sensation seeking is a genetic trait similar to what we call high sensitivity or sensory processing sensitivity, but sensation seeking originated a couple of decades before Dr. Elaine Aron was doing her work in the 90s. So Dr. Marvin Zuckerman was actually investigating sensory deprivation experiments and found there were some people who didn't like to be in quiet, didn't like to be alone in these rooms where they were deprived of sensations. They really wanted out. So over the next couple of years, they delineated a couple of quadrants or aspects that they noticed that seemed to fit together with these people, patterns that fit together. And they realized eventually it was a trait, a genetic trait. There's been a lot of work since that time. But let's go through just the four core aspects real quick so we have a really accurate understanding of what it is. So the first aspect is thrill and adventure seeking. And unfortunately, a lot of people get stuck on this one when they think of sensation seeking. They think, wow, it means skydiving and bungee jumping and going really fast and those kinds of things. And that is one aspect. But risk taking is not associated with sensation seeking. You don't have to be a risk taker to be a sensation seeker. The second aspect is novelty and new experience seeking. And a lot more people, particularly sensitives, will relate to novelty and new experience seeking because they have curious, deep minds and we like to think about things. We have to have something to process, right? The third core aspect of sensation seeking is boredom susceptibility. And think of that as a lower bar for feeling bored in kind of repetitive or stale or boring situations. We have just a lower bar and we cross that bar sooner than do other people that are lower in sensation seeking. The last one is disinhibition. So kind of the opposite of inhibition. So as much as inhibition is like, hey, let's think about this, let's not do this. Disinhibition is like, yeah, let's do this for sure. So the four of those work together. You can see how you have to be a little bit disinhibited in order to do things like novelty and new experience seeking. You have to have a little bit of boredom susceptibility to provide that driver to push you forward. And so you're not sitting still for too long. And it doesn't hurt to have some physical thrills now and then, though people that are highly sensitive may not identify as well with that one. That's kind of the crux of what sensation seeking is. It's been widely applied in the research literature in terms of not only things like risk taking and addictions and criminality, but in areas like gambling. Just amazingly, it's been widely applied and studied. So it's a general trait in human beings. In other words, all people are sensation seekers to some degree. Just a matter of whether you're low, medium, or high. In this case, we're talking about high sensation seekers who are also highly sensitive.
It's so fascinating to me because personally, I identify as a sensation seeker, but I also identify as an extrovert. I'm not a typical highly sensitive person. But as people are listening, my hunch is many people are thinking, highly sensitive person, sensation seeker, they don't quite go together. So can you speak a little bit more about the highly sensitive sensation seeker and how it is that it sort of combines into one person rather than making them sort of feel like they have this split personality?
Sometimes they do feel like they have a split personality, Melissa. It's been described as one foot on the brake, one on the gas. Now, I feel like that's a little bit over dramatic, but it's an accurate feeling at times. And you can be high in sensation seeking. That is, you have a strong need for novel and varied sensations. And it's really about the anticipation of the reward that comes with the novelty seeking, right? So if you're traveling, say, and you're coming, you know, there's a lot of cool destinations you could go see. You always forget the fatigue factor when you're traveling, but there's a lot of cool things like I'm going to push a little further and go do something and then something else and something else. That sensation seeking kind of is the exploratory aspect. sometimes I call it the Star Trek gene, because I think it's really about kind of boldly going, for its own sake. Now, if you're a highly sensitive person at the same time, you kind of have the opposite thing going on. In other words, you feel more like, I want to pause to think. I want to be more careful and more deliberate about my travels or my experiences. And maybe I don't want to push myself quite as hard. So you can be both, and it seems quite dichotomous to be high sensation seeking and highly sensitive at the same time. But yet we now know from new research that up to 50% of highly sensitive people are also high in sensation seeking. That doesn't mean they're at the extreme high end, but it does mean that this is a less talked about subject, and we need to talk about it a lot more, because I think that we need to open that doorway for people who are, it's easier to subscribe to sensation seeking in some ways, easier to identify with that. American society identifies with sensation seeking really well. It doesn't identify as well with sensitivity. So my concern is that it obscures. In other words, if you're subscribing to sensation seeking only, you may miss the point that you're also a deeper thinker, you're more reflective, more empathic, and that you notice subtleties. So I think it's really important to talk about this a lot more, and the research bears that out.
So I'm really curious, because I think I just heard you say that it's up to 50% of highly sensitive people that are sensation seekers. My memory is that it was more like 30%. So is there some new research that you're talking about where this number has sort of increased? Do we have new knowledge about the highly sensitive sensation seeker?
We do, Melissa, and it's fantastic to talk about this, because this is really the first really good scientific study that's been done looking at sensitivity and sensation seeking. I did a lot of the qualitative work years prior in my book, Thrill, the high sensation seeking, highly sensitive person. That was qualitative, and qualitative work is not generalizable. So we learned a lot of attitudes about people, their experiences, their narratives in life, and we kind of learned what it means to them. But we didn't learn anything about generalizability. So we did a quantitative study, Bianca Acevedo, Dr. Elaine and Arthur Aaron, Robert Marhinke. Us as a team, we did a study looking at designing a survey that people would take. And we gave them a variety of instruments. We gave them the highly sensitive person scale, the sensation seeking scale with the original one from Dr. Marvin Zuckerman, the revised one we gave them as well. We gave them an impulsivity scale and a risk-taking scale. So we did a lot of scales for people. And what we found through analysis of our results was that up to 50% seemed to identify as highly sensitive, that were also high in sensation seeking. And kind of a note, I say sensitive sensation seekers as a short way of saying high sensation seeking, highly sensitive person.
Got it. And I'm curious, in the research that you did, if you found any sort of like gender split when it came to sensation seekers or not. Like, as I'm listening to you, even as an identifying female sensitive sensation seeker, the way that you describe it almost sounds more like men. Like, are more men likely to be sensitive sensation seekers, or do we find in equal numbers in men and women? Is there any gender factor that you've noticed?
There's a gender factor, Melissa, with sensation seeking. Dr. Zuckerman said that more men are sensation seekers than are women. Now, we know with sensitivity that it's equally split between men and women. So if you're a sensitive sensation seeking man, you may be, there may be more of those than there are less sensitive sensation seeking, lower sensation seeking men. So we need more research, actually, if we want to know the differences between the number of men that are sensitive sensation seekers and women. But we do know among sensation seekers, there's more men than women. And it's more culturally approved of as well in some ways, due to cultural ideas about masculinity and risk-taking and impulsivity and what men should be like versus what women should be like. And those are socially constructed roles, but people largely still adhere to those in many ways, though it's changing.
Yes, I work with sensitive adults, and I often hear from sensitive men that they really struggle to fit into the culture because, as you just beautifully said, culture doesn't really seem to honor sensitive men. So can you talk a little bit about your experience as a sensitive man, about sort of how you view sensitive men in our culture, and maybe speak to the sensitive men that are listening, that are probably jumping up and down right now saying, yes, you see me, you get me.
Right. And for too long, sensitive men have really felt not seen or heard. And so we got together a couple of years ago and designed a film called Sensitive Men Rising. And our goal with that really was to raise awareness that sensitive men are out there. They're 50% of the highly sensitive population, that they perhaps have struggled growing up. They perhaps have not been supported. Perhaps they've been blamed or shamed or guilted in some way for not fitting cultural stereotypes about masculinity. But these are fantastic men with a broader possible range of not only emotions and thoughts and behaviors, but they actually take a different path, a more spiritual path. And that's something that's critical in our day and age, because this inward turn is something that I feel personally really needs to happen in American society and in the world, as we see the shadow elements playing out across the world and causing all kinds of harm. So this inward turn where we're re-exploring ourselves, where men are rediscovering or coming to their truest authentic selves, will provide a much more broader foundation that's more secure, more content, more calm, more balanced, if you will, and sensitive men. And particularly in this film is designed to be the leader, the one that is really opening the door for men and allowing them to come through and say, hey, maybe sensitivity is not a bad thing at all. Maybe it's a pretty cool thing. Entertain this idea, watch this film, see if there's some guys in here that you identify with. And there are men and women in this film. For instance, Alanis Morissette is in the film talking about her sons, right? So we have that. We have the wonderful musician and artist and actor Luke Goss talking about his expressions of sensitivity. He's an amazing poet and an amazing spiritual thinker. So we have a broad range of people in the film, but sensitive men, right? We've been overlooked for too long. And here we are. This film is opening that doorway, and everyone is free to come through it, men and women, and discuss what it means to be sensitive and to be a man in our society.
It's fabulous. It's time to have a film like that, and I'm so excited to see it and to learn from all of the people who've really made it come to fruition. I'm curious because I heard you say something about, I believe you said something about a spiritual journey or a spiritual path, and for me personally, I'm an incredibly spiritual person. I think sensitive people have maybe even a broader capacity for spirituality than non-highly sensitive people, because we do feel things on a deeper level. We do process, we do look for the subtleties, the nuance and connection. And I'm curious about your perspective about the spiritual journey for sensitive people, and if there's any sort of dovetailing that you see with sensation seeking and sensitivity, and if that sort of leads to a more impactful spiritual journey.
This is one of the areas that I'm so excited about when I talk about sensitive sensation seekers. I think we have this incredible kind of dynamic inside of us. We not only have the deeper thinking and the more reflective and contemplative capacity, we have the high empathy. So we're not only sensing how other people are doing, what they're feeling and thinking, but we're sensing in ourselves, within our own bodies and our own minds, how we're feeling and where we're at in life, and what we want to do with ourselves during this time. So meaningfulness, right? That really matters to us so much more, and it processes so much more deeply, along with everything else that we feel. It's not just about feelings, it's about thoughts, but it's about spirituality at the same time. Cultivating some sense of meaning in this world and how we spend our time away from culture, apart from culture, beyond culture, if you will, beyond expectations from other people. Who and what are we meant to be as our sole purpose? And how do we get back to that? Beyond culture, how do we refute that? But a sensitive sensation seeker has that dynamic of not only that deep thinking capacity and noticing subtleties and toying around with those ideas, but we have the sensation seeker at the same time that's highly charged, if you will. They have that fuel, that burning need to experience novelty, new experiences, and that can be an inward journey at the same time. Dr. Zuckerman said that high sensation seekers are also highly creative by nature. So what's the better use of creativity than to create your own life in a very spiritual sense? In other words, to go inwardly, but then to turn it externally, to share with the world, to make the world better, to make our lives better and our families happier. It's like an incredible thing that we can do when you are a high sensation seeking, highly sensitive person, or a sensitive sensation seeker, is to develop your capacities and go beyond ego, right? Where ego needs to control and be right at all costs. We say, let's lessen ego. Let's step back and get back to a core essence. And I think that the fuel that's provided by being a high sensation seeker and the reflective capacity of the sensitivity, that's a dynamic combination. It really is.
Yeah, I'm over here like my mind is sort of blown because initially when I was asking you, I was thinking personally about places I've traveled to the Himalayas, classes that I've taken that sort of inspired thinking in different ways, novel ideas about the universe, and. But when I'm hearing you talk about this inward journey, I'm thinking, yes, I've had that also. I've just never really thought about that as it sort of being a correlation of the combination of being sensitive and a sensation seeker, and so. I'm almost wondering if people listening who aren't sensation seekers and aren't highly sensitive would be jealous about those of us who have this unique combination, because it really does offer up this rich unfolding for enjoying life and sort of, taking a bite out of the best that it has to offer.
That's an interesting concept. And I think that people who are high in particular traits like sensation seeking and sensitivity have a responsibility at the same time, because we are so keenly attuned to the world and the environment, our inner and outer milieu that's going on all of the time. I think we notice things more than other people. We notice when things need to change, when things are out of balance. But we also experience everything more deeply because of that. So we can sense when things are out of whack, and we may know what to do to bring it back into balance. Like with masculinity, we may be able to figure out a way to help bring that back in. We can see the damage and the destruction caused by kind of this horrendous idea of masculinity around the world. So the idea, though, is to invite other people into this experience and not hoard it for ourselves. So as we become healers and we become spiritual leaders and we become guides and mentors and teachers, the impetus is to then share that and to have proteges and to have students and to have people who are following kind of our lead in turning inwardly. But also then, so that's us having done our inner work first, turning it externally so we're able to share that with the world. There's not a lot of point in hoarding it to ourselves and being like a monk on a mountaintop, but rather coming down and sharing it with the rest of the world so we can ease suffering in people, so we can help them find contentment and peace, but also live very happy, balanced lives. So it has a tremendous responsibility at the same time. And with freedom comes responsibility.
Absolutely. So I think what I'm also hearing you say is that sensitive sensation seekers make wonderful leaders.
Sensitive sensation seekers are dynamic leaders. When you think of the deeper thinking capacity, the high creativity, it's kind of by definition of both traits, or both highly creative in some ways. Uh, as leaders, the way we approach leadership is very different at the same time. Again, because it's kind of from an above the line viewpoint where ego is kept at bay. Everything kind of below the line is more ego controlled, more demand to be right at all costs and put other people down and don't help them to grow. The above the line leadership really is about altruism. It's about mentoring other people, sharing what we know, letting them have the center stage and the spotlight, realizing that we're not the center of the universe. We're only here for a short time. So it is a conscious leadership style, something that we openly embrace, those of us who choose leadership. And I think it almost follows as you develop yourself and you do that inner work first, you almost have necessity to become a leader in some way, whether it's in business or whether it's in your community or however you choose to lead. You become a de facto leader by being so well evolved and so well developed.
Yes, and I love this idea of leadership sort of starting in smaller places. Oftentimes when we talk about leadership, we think big, like CEOs or presidents, but really, we have these very small communities starting in our homes and our local community, and there are all of these opportunities to show up and sort of set the tone, I guess, is really what it is. Sort of shift the way that we're doing things and bringing that sensitivity, that sort of delicateness of how things will impact everybody around us. Being more aware of that ripple it's really such a gift that we have as sensitive people.
It's a straddling of kind of both East and Western cultures, right? Eastern cultures primarily communal. They think in terms of the group. Individualistic cultures like Western cultures, we think in terms of the individual only. So it's blending the two together and it's balancing it out. So you can be someone who's very well developed as an individual and still be concerned about the group and how your actions affect other people. For sensitive men, though, it really starts with reconciling ourselves with the lives that we had growing up and whether we were accepted or not accepted or supported or were bullied in some way or made to feel lesser than. So having to heal ourselves in that way and reconcile who is our core self, and then sometimes becoming fathers. And that's the first leadership role we take on, is becoming fathers, and thinking about what that means. How do you not only, as you put it, kind of delicately manage parenting, and that's a hard job, by the way, but think about, what you're putting into these children's minds, and then what kind of adults they're going to become. And I'm very encouraged about that, because we are seeing these younger generations that are more open and more accepting and more tolerant. And I think that's only a good thing going forward.
I totally agree with you. And I'm curious, for people who are listening who are thinking like, yeah, it all sounds wonderful, but things were so difficult for me, or things are so difficult now, or I don't have the time and space that I need to really take care of myself so that I can show up in my, self-actualized, or my transcended state. What soothing words do you have for those people that are sort of in the struggle, like they know where they want to be, but they aren't yet there?
Everywhere is somewhere along the line on their journeys. Whether you're still working on healing from traumas that you suffered early on, or something that you experienced later, everywhere is somewhere along that path. And you can only be exactly where you're at this moment. But if you're continuing to work on it and to focus on it and to think about it and learn new skills and learn new topics, such as learning about high sensitivity, for instance, if you learn that this is a valid thing, it's a real thing with science behind it, and you learn to heal from trauma, and you learn to meet other people that are highly sensitive and connect with them, you then have a really amazing combination. If you learn about high sensation seeking and you read some books and watch some of the films, I think you'll have a good grounding. But it's also a practice, right? It's a lifelong practice of coming to this knowing of oneself. So no matter where you're at on the journey, it's always fine to turn the focus inwards, right? And go inwards at times. I mean, we kind of do it in a light version in America, but we really need something much more deep, much more profound and meaningful, that allows people to really understand their core selves and not act out of the shadow characters, out of balance and imbalance. We really need people to focus on the good and the positive. And we see so much going on around us that shows us that we're lacking in those departments. And no matter where you're at on the journey, there's healing, there's learning to be had, there is growth to be had, and there are people that are willing to help and that are working to provide those resources and those efforts to help you along the way. So you're not alone. Everyone is on the journey.
It's very soothing to hear that. I have another question for you that sort of circles back to where we started, if that's okay. We were really talking about sensation seeking as it relates to high sensitivity, but I'm curious, can people that aren't highly sensitive also be sensation seekers? And I'm just wondering, for those of us that, kind of live in this world of sensitivity, I'm wondering if we can understand those non-highly sensitive people a little better. If you can just talk about the non-highly sensitive sensation seeker. I'm thinking that they might be a little brash or a little big in their energy, in the way that they show up. If they've got these four quadrants, as you described, this thrill and adventure seeking and looking for new experiences, and boredom susceptibility and risk inhibition. I'm wondering, like, are these the people that are running and jumping off of cliffs and base diving? And is that what a non-highly sensitive sensation seeker might look like?
In some cases, maybe, yeah, right? I mean, it takes an awful lot to get someone that's highly sensitive and high sensation seeking to jump off of a cliff. I mean, maybe if they're unconscious, you could push them off the cliff, or, something like that. But I think it takes someone that is not at the extreme end of high sensitivity. And sensitivity increasingly is being thought of as a general trait as well. So with about 30% in the highly sensitive group, and that means kind of not the extreme end, but kind of a range, right? 40% in the moderately sensitive group, and about the bottom 30% would be low sensitive. So kind of depending on where you are along that range would determine how reflective you are, how deep of a processor you are, whether you notice subtleties or not. But it's also been equated to kind of metaphorical between kind of the orchids, the dandelions, and the tulips. That's an article that's kind of equating what it takes to be highly sensitive. Is kind of like an orchid in a way. It takes kind of special lighting conditions and thrives in the right environment, right? Whereas on the extreme other end of it, you kind of have dandelions. They're everywhere. They're hardy. They could take over. You can't get rid of them. They survive through anything. And tulips are kind of that middle ground, where they kind of do really well, kind of in almost any environment. They come up right after the snow, sometimes through the snow. and they last for a while, and they're kind of moderately hardy, right? So if you think of it in that way, I mean, people are kind of the same in some ways. So you can be a high sensation seeker and be moderately sensitive or be low sensitive. But if you're low sensitive and a high sensation seeker, maybe you aren't weighing the consequences of what you're contemplating to do, right? As well as you might. And there are costs associated with that. So Dr. Zuckerman said that the most healthy expression of any trait is at the moderately high level, not at the extreme high and not at the extreme low, but somewhere at the moderately high, because then you get the full potentialities of what that trait offers, right? Without the costs that come with either underestimating what's going to happen to you if you do this, or being so concerned about what's going to happen that you don't even do the experience at all. So you definitely can be moderately sensitive, low sensitive, and be a high sensation seeker, but there are kind of our differences that happen with each one of those and how high sensation seeking might be expressed.
So interesting. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you talk about this more in a book that you wrote called Thrill. Yes?
Right. I called the book Thrill, for a reason. I thought that was an attention grabbing, but it is about the high sensation seeking, highly sensitive person. And it's a book that it's a great seller. It's really the only book still that's out there. And I wrote that book because one did not exist for us. And it answered questions that I had about being highly sensitive and these other parts of myself. It's like, wait, but I do these other things and I have these other kind of issues that are holes that I don't really see filled in by high sensitivity. And so I realized just in coming across a couple of pieces of literature that I could research this. This is something I could do and I need to do. And I did. And there's the book for you. So it's available for anybody to read. And it's going to give you a very good grounding. There are narratives. So there are people you'll identify with, people that you might not identify with, but it will help you form a context for what it means to be a sensitive sensation seeker.
Fantastic. And so for people who want to learn from you beyond Thrill, are there other ways that they can work with you, learn from you? Tell us about what you're up to these days.
Oh, thanks so much for mentioning. I have a workshop coming up in November, actually, for sensitive sensation seekers. So you're just in luck. If you really want to learn more about this and you kind of feel intrigued by this and you say, I'd like to meet some other people that are sensitive sensation seekers, feel free to come to our workshop and let's explore and see what your experiences have been. And then let me take you through a journey for a day and we'll see how much you can learn and see how much you can realize about what it means to be a sensitive sensation seeker and what you can do with it. It's really about application. As much as we'll talk about these things, I care more about what you do with it, how it helps you to live your life and to be a self-actualizer and to be happy and content through your life.
Which is really the ultimate goal, right? For us to be self-actualized and living the life of our dreams, connected to our highest self, to others, to our community. And so it sounds very exciting. I'm going to take a look into that. And can you also let people know how they can watch the Sensitive Men Rising film? Is it available online, or how can people watch that if they want to?
We premiered it July 16th in San Francisco, and then we're finalizing the final cut of it just now over the next couple of weeks. We're anticipating taking it to some film festivals before we release it for commercial release. So it's going to be offline for a little bit, and then it's going to come out. I'm not sure exactly where it's going to be, but it's going to be widely available within probably the next few months.
Super. That sounds wonderful. And I'm just curious if there are any last thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with, any last tips that might come to mind, or any high note that you want to send everybody off with.
I want to say thank you so much for inviting me to speak about sensitive sensation seekers. It's a passion topic for me, being a sensitive sensation seeker myself. So I love when I'm gathered together with other high sensation seeking, highly sensitive people. Even I wind up saying the entire title sometimes. But it's a wonderful combination of the two traits. And though it may seem difficult to learn to balance the two together, it can very effectively be done. And it takes some reflection, it takes some work, just like anything in life. But when you do have some understanding and awareness of what it means to be the potentialities of both traits, then you can start to see, okay, this is how it's played out in my life to date. But here is where I could take it to, right? Here is how I could do some side gigs, or here is how I could chart a new path for myself. And these are kind of the things that I can now have in my toolbox. Sensitivity is now in my toolbox. High sensation seeking is now in my toolbox. These are my base layers for how I experience life. And then I can make choices on top of that. And let's see what happens with it. So I think it's an incredible combination of traits in up to 50% of highly sensitive people. So we're not talking about a minority here anymore. Science has helped us see that, no, it's actually more than we thought. So it's definitely worth exploring because everyone is a sensation seeker to some degree.
Tracy, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for bringing us all of this new research, which is just mind-blowing and very soothing to know that, that there are so many of us out there. And thank you to everybody who joined us for this session. Bye for now.